On November the 14th, hundreds of thousands of Americans from many different regions rallied in Washington, D.C. in support of Donald Trump and called for an investigation into election fraud. The massive crowd marched from Liberty Square to the Supreme Court. Many participants stated that they were there to uphold the values of democracy, and they cannot allow a candidate that cheated to lead the United States on the road to socialism. At the state capital of Georgia in Atlanta, a woman said her son was a soldier who lost his life in Iraq, and the flag she was holding was used to hang on her son's grave. She attended the Stop the Steal rally in Atlanta not only to defend people's right to vote, but also to speak out for those soldiers who died for the country.
Bled, gave their lives long before my son did for the ability and the right and the privilege to vote, because it is a privilege. And if it's being abused or done illegally, the integrity of that vote loses its importance. And to me, that means my son's life didn't matter. And the other millions of people who fought for that right to vote, their lives must not matter either.
Trump supporters in Nevada also gathered in front of the state capitol to protest, calling for a fair election. Many people said that they had never seen so many standing up to say no to election fraud before in the United States.
Time for us to stand up and say that we're not going to be pushed around, we're not going to let this false election go through, so we're here to stand for Nevada and stand for the United States.
Californians gathered in the capital city, Sacramento, to protest against the election fraud and demand a full audit and manual ballot recount.
If we can't trust an electoral, like a voting process, if we can't trust that we have free and fair elections, then we can never move together as a community.
Chinese immigrants told NTD-TV that they feel they must participate in the rally no matter how much effort they need to put in. Because it's a battle against communism, every effort is worthwhile.
We don't want American change to communist. If Biden will be the president, I'm so disappointed because I don't think we have hope.
In front of the plaza of the Massachusetts state capitol in Boston, there was a man from Texas. He said it had been 40 years since he immigrated to the United States from the Philippines. He realized that the election was a showdown between freedom and communism.
We have to do our part as patriot Americans, because this might be our last chance. We might have come to a point of no return. And I grew up in the Philippines, and we have witnessed how the atrocities of authoritarian regime destroys the lives of many people.
And welcome to Beyond the Noise. I'm David Zhang. A question came to me yesterday. What happens if Trump loses his court cases? Well, is it going to be what the legacy media is saying? That if Trump loses 2020, he will run again in 2024? That he is seriously considering running for 2024, all that circulating news articles and reports are based on an apparent conversation that Trump had with his advisors. Which advisor? CNN already called out that Trump will be a frontrunner for the 2024 nomination. These reports are assuming already that Trump is losing. Their only source of this information might have just been from the White House's former chief strategist Steve Bannon, who says Trump will run again if for any reason the election is stolen from, or in some of ways that Joe Biden is declared the winner. What Bannon actually means is that if for any reason the election is fraudulent and Biden ends up becoming the winner, then Trump will not give up and you will never see him stop fighting for it. Bannon's original intention was to deliver Trump's unwavering determination. But after legacy media's twists and turns, it became that Bannon thinks Trump will accept defeat. We also know that almost all media under the current circumstances refuse to bring in the conversation of voting fraud to the table. Like what Giuliani said yesterday during the press conference, any one of their evidences can be the headline on papers and news, but the Iron Curtain of the media censorship is refusing to talk about it. Do you expect anyone to talk about what happened after this election in 4 years? Well, no one will be if the Democrat becomes elected. If an illegally elected president gets into power, do you expect 4 years to somehow change him? Or will he use the 4 years to perfect their fraudulent techniques and silence the leftovers? In 4 years, we're going to see the headlines that the Democrat was the choice of the people, choice of history, that they represent the most progressive culture and the production. Kamala Harris even mentioned in a video on November 1st that she wants the people to have equitable treatments in which everyone ends up in the same place. Sounds familiar? That is what communism says. Let me talk about the history of how Venezuela became socialist and how communist China took over in 1949. Hugo Chavez changed Venezuela in a span of 4 years. In February of 1992, after much controversy, Hugo Chavez gained power and wanted to practice socialism in Venezuela. Initially, there was so much backlash. But what did he do? Begin a constitution assembly 6 months later to change Venezuela's constitution. But the courts came in and said that Chavez cannot do that. He cannot change the constitution. How did Chavez deal with the judges? He labeled them with corruption charges. He subsequently named 190 judges with corruption charges and terminated them. Then December came and the new constitution was passed. Keep in mind, this was all done under a supposed democrat government system in Venezuela that was supposed to be representing the Venezuelan people. It took 10 months from February to December to change the constitution. In December 1999, Venezuela saw a big flash flood and mudslide, the Vargas tragedy. And the local media reported that 10,000 to 30,000 deaths occurred. News media even blamed Chavez for many issues related to the flood. Chavez went to the local area and did an apparent survey of the damage and such. Did he actually care? No, he went there to take care of the local news outlets. Because in the following year, another major flood happened. I mean, no major changes or improvements happened during the year, so obviously another incident occurred. And this time, major media only reported 3 deaths. It went from upwards of 30,000 deaths in 1 year to just 3 deaths in the following year. Think about that. And then Chavez continued to hold his power until his death, using that Smartmatics voting system he had asked to create to ensure that he always won. We talk about this period in our recent videos, so you can go and check out that. Therefore, do you think that a winner produced from a fraudulent election will be different? That they will just give up their power? Remember, the Dems want to pack the court, reduce the power of the justices in the Supreme Court. What does 4 year also mean? In 1949, the Communist Party moved into Beijing and had their first People's National Assembly. During the assembly, politicians from all political alignments were voicing their opinions and fantasizing about the future of China. I would say the quietest person there might have been Mao Zedong. Quickly, the Korean War, one that even Chinese people didn't consent to, even people inside the Communist Party didn't agree with, started. What did Mao tell the armed police director, Luo Ruiqing? Well, don't waste your time. Now is the moment to suppress the anti-revolutionaries. From 1949 to 1953, 4 years in the Korea War, CCP took land ownership and other economic sources. They also killed many people and, most importantly, destroyed the 1946 Republic of China Constitution. With that, it destroyed the people's first ideology, and that the democracy stemming from people was also gone. Thus began the communism ruling in China. Those loud political voices during the first assembly were no longer talking and no longer voicing any opposition. So if Trump were to back down, it would be the end of it. There is no coming back. There's no coming back in 2014. Representative AOC wanted to start a crime list of Republican and conservative names. Think about that. The legacy media won't even ask about the witnesses in the affidavits and won't investigate the voting issues, not to mention the threats targeted at Trump's lawyers and witnesses and Republican members for speaking up. So what can Trump do if state courts rule against him? He needs the Supreme Court. The only way in the end is for the Supreme Court to rule the entire election as invalid and begin an investigation into people involved in election crimes. Investigate those who are attempting to destroy the democracy through voting fraud and treason. So this might be why Trump's team is so secretive about giving away evidences. They want to collect it all for the Supreme Court, waiting for the right moment. This is what the people would want, for the Supreme Court to do the right thing. Otherwise, we're waiting for a potential civil unrest. American Constitution rights are divine consented. It is the right of the people to protest the government if the government does not represent their will. We're approaching a very sensitive time period. We have to watch out. But something does shine through all this. Appointing Christopher Miller to Secretary of Defense, during his speech at Fort Bragg to Special Ops members, he said the following, that Special Operation leaders are to directly report to him to go around the Pentagon's chain of commands. Some people may think this was to clean the swamp of the Pentagon, or to train a special force that could serve Trump. But I think there may be more to it. If it were really true that Miller is trying to drain the swamp, then you would immediately hear backlashes and contention from the legacy media and Democrats. If it were about a Trump army, then you would definitely hear all kinds of reports calling Trump power hungry and a dictator for wanting to control the military for his personal use. But they did not react to it. Because Trump is only actually executing the desire of the Congress, including Democrats, because in 2016, the Congress wanted a high surveillance of special forces operation teams. And the first iteration of the special ops was actually during World War II to fight against Hitler. And then after that, during the Reagan era, the US Special Operations Command was created. But the commanders are generals in the military. There wasn't a Pentagon head in that team, unlike the other US Army branches, which were oversighted by a head or director. It would be difficult to carry out operations to communicate with command stations or supplies, etc., because there were commanders who could fight, but they needed a so-called management team behind them. But it also gave them decades of autonomy and combat experiences. In order to carry out their dangerous operations, you need to communicate with the air forces, the navies, and such. Without these, it would hinder their development and movements. So Congress was also concerned with their militaristic abilities and lack of control. Therefore, in 2017, they had enforced a so-called civilian leadership inside the Special Ops to have an assistant secretary to oversee the branch. This is a milestone because only standalone branches would have an assistant secretary from the Pentagon. Therefore, Miller's announcement indicates the creation of another military branch. In 2021, the military economic plans show that they again want to further enhance the civilian control over this branch. But this move by Trump was to maximize the US military in future conflicts, to include special combat into another tool to utilize with now a full backing and support from all the way from the Pentagon. Therefore, what Trump is doing is just executing the intention of the Congress. But there is also actually a hidden meaning. On September 4th, 1957, the first day of the class at Central High, Governor Orville Faubus called the Arkansas National Guard to block the black students from entry into the high school. And then later that month, President Eisenhower sent in federal troops to escort the Little Rock Nine into the school. So it drew national attention to the civil rights movements. It was a success of constitutional preservation because the Supreme Court had ruled to allow the students to enter. There are 3 points to this story. The first is that the decision by the Supreme Court was effective. That was the baseline. The operation of the military was after the Supreme Court ruling. This is why I say we're going to continue down this path. If leading to potential civil unrest, we would need the Supreme Court to rule properly. The second was the mayor seeks help from the federal government, even though the governor opposed. This was a reason to allow federal intervention. And the third, using the 101st Airborne Division wasn't a coincidence. That troop is experienced and hard-fought wars in Europe during the World War II. More importantly, the troops listened to Eisenhower and wouldn't be scared to enforce the Constitution against the state guards, who are also American citizens. In the case the Supreme Court rules that the election was invalid or overturns any decisions, there's maybe bound to happen to have civil oppositions, or that there will be orders to arrest individuals on grounds of treason. Many people will have a hard time believing the results of the ruling. It is at that moment people can be used for the ill-intentioned media. If violence comes during then, Trump will need his own 101st Airborne to take care of it. If he doesn't, then it will become the ordinary people who may take their guns to protect their constitution. And then the suffering will be to the individual man. In other words, using the army is the right move. not only will it minimize potential casualties, it will be to enhance the justice of the American society. But which troop is going to be used? Obviously, Trump isn't Eisenhower. He doesn't have a direct control of the 101st Airborne like Eisenhower did. But Miller, who was a Green Beret, Special Ops, and also Michael Nagata, Lieutenant General, who assumed the position of Director of Strategic Operational Planning at the National Counterterrorist Center, may be the key. Interestingly, they were also co-workers. Remember, Miller said that the secretaries and officials will directly report to him. Well, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Special Ops? It's Ezra Cohen Watnick, who was a former aide to Trump's first National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn. Watnick and Flynn had been swallowed by the swamp back in 2017, but now he's back. So this is where Trump will prepare for his long-term strategy if things go south. Trump respects the Constitution, but I also know that Trump knows the original intention of the Constitution is to enhance the people's rights.
We tax and regulate and restrict our companies to death, and then we allow foreign countries that cheap to export their goods to us tax-free.
America first or America last. That's really what it all boils down to. Do you want a president who puts our country's interests above all else? Or a president who has consistently sold out to the highest bidders? Do you want a commander-in-chief who has spent the vast majority of his life outside the Beltway swamp? Or an entrenched Beltway barnacle who has spent the last half-century enriching himself and his family through domestic and foreign influence peddling run amok?
Individualism and individual rights will be subverted, sublimated to the global rights, the communal rights. And it's a sign that Joe Biden won't put America first. He's not out to make America better, and he won't make that his first priority. He's got to do the bidding of Bloomberg, Wall Street, big business, and the rest of the special interests that bankrolled his campaign. And of course that means kowtowing to the elites who don't give a damn about jobs and wages for Americans. They never did. That's why it's imperative that we hold the Senate next year. Because with a majority in that chamber, plus our gains in the House, we actually have a chance at thwarting this kind of takeover of the levers of power from our government to a government far, far away. And we can make sure that the America First movement continues to deliver results that our citizens and we can use to build a future where our children can actually thrive under the system of government and with our inalienable rights that we all love and cherish.
In my administration, we live by two simple rules: buy American and hire American. Buy American and hire American. Buy American and hire American. I've been saying buy American ever since I announced I was running for office, and long before that.
True. Well, maybe that wasn't such a bad idea after all, Mr. Trump. Another one of those messy moments when he turns out to be right all along. Just wait until Biden asks for a wall. So, the rest of us have caught up to Trump. For example, we now realize China is engaging in war against America. And it's not a cold one, but a sleek, lab-built hot war that destroys an economy and disrupts political life with a weapon more modern than a bomb and minus the messy retaliation.
It's up to American patriots to oppose what they're trying to do at almost every turn. And that means supporting Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue in Georgia in that runoff on January 5th. And it means keeping pressure on Republican elected officials across the board. But let's face it, before Trump, a lot of them were wrong on both trade and immigration. Got to keep an eye on them. And over the next 4 years, these Republicans are going to come under enormous media and financial pressure to appease the global elites.
Elephant's new work-from-home discount is simple. The more days you work from home, the bigger your discount.
And make no mistake about it, the globalists are determined to ram through their agenda. And given Biden's age and mental acuity, or lack thereof, they probably feel like they have a very narrow window, very short window to achieve their grand designs. If Biden gets into office, get ready for the fight of your life over the next years.
This is where the conversation's going. It's going to be a less multilateral world. We're going to have more of a kind of a gunboat mercantilism, if you guys know what I'm talking about, where we're going to protect our own shipping with our own Navy, not protect the entire world's free trade with our Navy. Those days are over. The Cold War is kind of crumbling, and we're kind of getting back to American first, and Trump was right about it. Now, Joe's gone far left on the environment, and he's gone far left on the defund the police. So I honestly don't know where Joe is at any given moment, and neither does he.
But as Cranky Joe likes to say, come on, man. The family has profited mightily from the perks of entrenched incumbency, from earmarks and sweetheart real estate deals to lucrative jobs in government and on Wall Street. Biden has campaigned for 5 decades as a man of the people, while using his political clout to install his late son Beau and his remaining son Hunter in countless positions of privilege and influence. Drug-addled loser Hunter failed upward from jobs at the Clinton Commerce Department to bank-holding giant MBNA, to the Amtrak Board of Directors, to a cushy job with the U.S. Naval Reserve, all with Papa Joe's help pulling the strings.
But if the press were actually doing its job, you'd be hearing a lot about the Bloomberg New Economy Forum, which has been going on all week, attended by modern-day global leaders and wealthy elites who supported Joe Biden. And they're so confident in their agenda, so buoyed by what they see as the defeat of the America First movement, that they aren't even trying to hide their disdain any longer for American sovereignty.
Were you surprised by how badly America has done on that? Very quickly.
Oh, it's mind-blowing.
When the Paris Agreement came into force, the United States withdrew from it and left us and all the other countries around the world disappointed.
The marketplace is encouraged by having a leader now that is more inclusive.
Inclusive. Of course. If they have their way, you're going to have no say in the future of the global economy, no way to affect it, no ability to change it.
Joe Biden's shady wheeling and dealing are nothing new to me or to the legions who read my 2009 book, Culture of Corruption, Obama and His Team of Tax Cheats, Crooks, and Cronies. In Chapter 3, I exposed the cronyism and the nepotism at the heart of Biden's son Hunter and brother Jim's crooked business ventures. Biden indignantly denies that he and his spawn have engaged in any untoward enterprises.
On trade, which we highlighted earlier this week, Bloomberg and his globalist cronies made clear in a special report what their overriding goal is: sticking together by guarding against the risk of the U.S. and China decoupling. Oh, they don't want that. Bloomberg and lots of other American plutocrats have billions tied up in China. So decoupling from the communist regime would be a disaster for them personally, even though it would be a huge boon to American industries and American workers.
240 years after the revolution, we've turned things completely upside down. We tax and regulate and restrict our companies to death, and then we allow foreign countries that cheat to export their goods to us tax-free. How stupid is this? How can it happen? How stupid is this? As a result, we have become more dependent on foreign countries than ever before. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to declare our economic independence once again.
At every turn, they will try to subvert your rights and take your prosperity. To start, they're going to crater your personal finances with insane climate policies.
We need a whole economy transition, backing those who are part of the solution and taking capital away from those who are part of the problem.
A cap and trade mechanism or some kind of carbon tax.
An active carbon market with a carbon price that would continue to step up in level every year.
Guaranteed tax increases on energy would devastate the middle class, but they know that. The elites know that. That's their entire point, remember?
The swamp's self-enriching business as usual was profoundly disrupted in 2016. Swamp creatures aim to take it back, not by persuasion, but by force, not by unfettered social engagement, but by tyrannical suppression, and not through the peaceful transition of power, but by agitation, resistance, and violence. The America Last mob is mobilized and activated. Are you?
In today's video, we're going to first bring you some news around discussions with Dominion, and also more evidence of its ties to America's biggest enemies. Then we'll give you an overview of the 8 ways in which voting fraud has occurred in this election. The ways in which Trump's legal team will use to gather evidence in court against it. Then I want to break down the slowly emergence and the danger of communism in the United States, and how it's harming the election and freedom. And last, we will talk about some news that has happened this week regarding Georgia and other swing states in election in general. Dominion has once again showed their mysterious foreign connection with Venezuela, Cuba, and Communist China through various evidences. On Glenn Beck, Sidney Powell said that the Dominion's office in Toronto and Colorado quickly moved, and their employees began to erase their online profile in connections to Dominion. A Twitter user was able to find a Dominion employee by the name of Andy Huang, who is the manager of IT infrastructure at Dominion. He worked for China Telecom in the early 2000s. Huang has since deleted his work history at Dominion on his LinkedIn. But when Googling Andy Huang on Dominion, you can still see it in the search results. China Telecom is one of the banned companies per Trump's executive order in a list of 31 corporations that America can no longer invest in starting next January. These companies all have deep ties with the Chinese government and its military. Dominion was supposed to appear in a state hearing in Pennsylvania on Friday, but backed out last minute. That was the chance that Dominion could have had to demonstrate what they say is true, but backing out last minute does hinder their credibility, and their claims of innocence as well. Sidney Powell pointed out that Dominion has direct ties with Venezuela through their apparent connection with Smartmatics, though they deny. The company that helped sustain dictator Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro's presidency, along with Cuba and China as well. The German server, which we will talk about later, is very important in this. We have in our previous video pointed out that some obvious signs of voter frauds. I want to give you guys an overview of the 8 types of potential voter frauds that is taking place. These are the points also outlined during the press conference by Trump's legal team. These are: first, the Republican poll watchers denied access or hindered access to watching counting. 2, Democrat-controlled precincts and areas treat voting differently than Republican areas. 3, cases of registered voters' votes being casted under another person's name. 4, illegal actions such as election officials being asked to change the date of the ballot. 5, vote cast for Biden were repeatedly scanned and counted multiple times by the voting machine. 6, certain electors counted absentee ballots that were not requested in advance, such as in Wisconsin. 7, the actual number of votes far exceeded the number of registered voters in certain precincts. And 8, the vote counting machines was a purposefully designed cheating software with links to foreign powers and leftist tycoon such as George Soros. These 8 charges, if we look at them in more details, actually contains 2 levels of allegation. One is at the surface level, encompassing the criminal and fraudulent operations behind the scene. The other is at the national security level, a coup d'etat across political parties with foreign intervention to subvert the national security and the legitimate government of the United States. The legacy media has been talking about Trump as a way of him being power hungry and refusing to leave the president's seat for the next person. But none of what the press conference covered is out of the context of the legal framework within the Constitution. On the other hand, if Biden believes that each of his votes are legitimate and can withstand the allegation, then he should support the work of Trump's team and use evidence through the judicial process to clear his own name, right? This is probably the only way to convince the American people that he's a legitimate president with more than 80 million votes. A record in American history, actually. As well, why haven't we seen anyone from Biden's legal team come forward to formally accuse the Trump team of misdoing? Are they perhaps getting paid for doing nothing? Why is it that the only opposition we ever see is from the legacy media? Now we have to talk about something I think is more as a clarification, but I actually think that we have to look at it beyond this election. This election is a cumulative battle for the future of America, and with it, the rest of the world as well. This is a conflict that transcends partisanship and party affiliation. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, because I think many people have this idea that socialism isn't bad. But what many don't know is that many ill-intentioned people in the United States have been quietly pushing an agenda that is beyond just socialism we see it. It is communism. Believing God has always been the fundamental to America. The early colonists fled here so that they could practice their religions freely. The nation was founded on the belief that we're all created equal by God and endowed by the Creator with our rights. The US motto is "In God we trust." Belief in God and the principles derived from that belief are the fundamental reasons why the United States can enjoy a freedom and democracy, as well as prosperity, and why the United States has become the nation it is today. In this great tradition, voting is a sacred duty in which each citizen may take responsibility for who governs. Communism will take all that divine rights away. Just like Jenna Ellis, one of Trump's legal team members, said, the objective is to make sure to preserve and protect election integrity. President Trump has been saying from day one that this is about maintaining free and fair elections in this country. It is not about overturning an outcome. It is about making sure that election integrity is preserved, and every American should want that. It isn't about who wins in the end. If democracy dies, voting itself becomes a non-existent concept.
Folks, this is Robin Hood, the legendary English folk hero, famous for taking from the rich and giving to the poor. Only this time, his arrows knocked and pointed straight at the fat cats on Wall Street. And if you click here right now, I'll show you how you can join the merry band.
One of the two major US parties, the Democratic Party, is no longer the political party it used to be. Over the decades, it has gradually been infiltrated by the Marxist ideology that created the most brutal and oppressive communist regime in history. The communism ideology, including socialism and its associated idea, is not a normal ideology. It is the ideology that has caused unnatural death for at least 100 million people. Take a look at what communism has done to Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea. More importantly, take a look at what China and Russia have gone through. Yesterday, I talked about what 4 years can do to a country under communism. Yet in the US, people are embracing it. On the other hand, there is also this emergence of what Giuliani calls the globalists. These are many corrupt top politicians, elites from different professions like business, media, and technology have colluded to form interest groups to divide the global pie of power and wealth. I don't know if you have noticed, these kind of large corporations uniting politicians and businessmen are most common and developed in communist China. This is because what's behind such a model must be totalitarian. So if we condemn and summarize all the talk that people who advocate globalization spout, it is simply community with a shared future for mankind. A concept delivered by former Chinese Communist Party leader Hu Jintao and advocates by its current leader Xi Jinping. In other words, we can see that the ultimate goal of these leftist interest groups in the West, especially in the United States, almost perfectly aligns with that of the Chinese Communist Party. This is why Trump has repeatedly said that Biden is a socialist. Trump's legal team also said that there is a foreign interference, and likely from China, in the US election, which we have mentioned before. Next, I want to talk about some of the new developments in battleground states. In Pennsylvania, a math petition from the Williams College said in an affidavit that he estimated the number of ballots that were either requested by someone other than the registered Republican or requested and returned but not counted range from 89,000 to 98,000, close to 100,000. Stephen Miller specializes in analytics number theory and sabermetrics, said that one incident of possible voter fraud involved in potential votes is that there were votes not counted, and another instance involved ballots that may have been requested by a person other than the GOP registered voter. The second news, which is that Chief Justice John Roberts shuffled the Supreme Court judges in the circuit courts. So a brief explanation of the circuit court is that there are 13 circuits in the US. Each circuit encompasses a geographic area that can have a few states. A Supreme Court judge is assigned in each circuit to deal with cases. The new shuffle means that Justice Alito will head the Pennsylvania area. Justice Kavanaugh will head the 6th Circuit, which includes Michigan State. Newly appointed Justice Amy Coney Barrett will be the 7th Circuit, which contains Wisconsin. Justice Clarence Thomas will be in the 11th Circuit, which includes Georgia. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Michigan are the 4 main states in which Trump has focused major litigations in. This is a good sign in that 4 justices are Republican-leaning. However, it does not mean that their party affiliation will determine how they deal with the cases, as there will still be the votes of all 9 judges in the Supreme Court that decides the outcome. The Pennsylvania Secretary of State Kathy Boockvar just had a switch in her legal defense team. Kirkland and Ellis withdrew from the case, and in place came a lawyer by the name of Barry Burke. This news shows that there's 2 things really. The first is Kirkland and Ellis saw difficulty in representing her in a court battle against the Trump campaign, and they decided it's not worth it. The second is Barry Burke. He's a lawyer who's known for white-collar crimes, getting people out of it, that is. He represented the New York Mayor Bill de Blasio and was later on in the committee to impeach President Trump. Kathy Boockvar getting him means that she probably has something to hide or feels guilty enough to need assistance from Burke. Now we also have to talk about what comes next in Georgia. Yesterday, the governor and Secretary of State of Georgia certified the recount. However, the governor says Trump's team still has time to pursue an audit. The results still showed that Biden is ahead by about 12,000 votes after this recount, and the left media again pronounced Biden as the predicted winner of Georgia. According to Georgia state law, if the gap between the 2 presidential candidates is less than or equal to 0.5%, the trailing party can request a recount. However, Trump's side was adamant on the appeal for recount as he wanted to remove any illegal votes and ballots tested for validity via signatures. So how did the recount in Georgia actually work? Well, lawyer Linwood revealed as early as the November 17th that he had received irrefutable evidences that the state had told municipal election officers to report the total of the previous ballots, not the actual ballot count. Moreover, they were also told not to verify the signature at all.
I'm making this quick video because it has been 1 month since joining the Cashflow 101 system, and so what I wanted to do is make this video to show you the results that I've gotten in my first month joining the system. And so
If that's true, then in other words, the so-called recount in Georgia has been a re-reporting of the first vote count and is a complete sham. And finally, the server in Germany has been pretty much confirmed at this point. It seems that Cindy Powell said on Glenn Beck yesterday that there's 3 main things we can tell right now. The first is that the server can be accessed by 4 of the US's biggest enemies: China, Cuba, Venezuela, and potentially North Korea. Enough evidence to overturn and prove voter fraud as well. It was taken by the US Army to the good guys. And then there's also multiple ways to alternate the votes. And it will take time for them to complete a massive amounts of evidence report, so we have to stay tuned. So this is really the turning point in which Trump's legal team is starting to turn from defense to offense. We'll have to wait for more to come. As always, I will bring you those analyses when the time comes. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Have a good weekend.